Leslie, thank you very much indeed. And can I just start by thanking Nicholas and all the organisers of this conference for inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. Leslie, I'm going to be brief because there are many more interesting speakers than me to come to talk about the relationship today. I'm going to just set a slightly counterintuitive note in my introductory remarks. We've listened to some fascinating scholarship in the first session. I was able to get the last part of it. I couldn't be there for the whole of it, alas, and I missed a lot of very interesting talk. But fascinating scholarship, recreating and understanding the world of Will Adams and the East India Company in the early 17th century. And we're now in this session looking at ways in which that the legacy of those first contacts between Britain and Japan resonate today and in the future. And after my short introductory remarks, we're going to hear about aspects of that relationship. We're going to hear about defence relations, we'll hear about science and technology links, we'll hear about the trade and investment relationship, which is at the heart of Britain and Japan and has been for the last 40 and 50 years. We're going to hear about social and human contacts as well. I think it is extremely powerful context for us to talk about that relationship in the setting of celebrating the first contacts between Britain and Japan. And I pay tribute to the scholars and historians who have, in recent years, expanded our understanding of the world in which Will Adams, John Saris, and the pioneers of the East India Company lived. But I hope that as we talk about the modern relationship, we will not fall into the trap of relating everything too simplistically to history. It's good to be reminded of historical resonances, but as I think everybody in this room would acknowledge and certainly understand, the countries which forged that first tentative relationship 400 years ago were very different countries from the Britain and Japan that we know today. Indeed, it's almost, I think, ahistorical to think of it as Britain, because Britain, as we understand it today, did not exist in 1613. We were very different countries in 1858, when Lord Elgin went to Japan as part of the then great powers opening up Japan after nearly 250 years of Tokugawa hegemony to open the country up to trade and investment links with the West. We were countries, Britain at the peak of its imperial ambition and scope, Japan having come out of a period of seclusion for 2.5 centuries, beginning slowly and then with formidable determination its extraordinary epoch-making period of industrialization, modernization, and its own global ambitions. We were very different countries in 1902 when we forged the first Anglo-Japanese alliance, renewed in later years. And we sometimes, and I hope I'm not being too controversial when I say this, but we sometimes sentimentalize the relationship which led to that alliance. It was, I think, scholars of the period would agree, an intensely pragmatic, almost transactional relationship. It could so easily have been a Russo-Japanese alliance as an Anglo-Japanese alliance. It was an aspect of Japan feeling its way with increasing confidence in the great power partnership of the great power competition of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In recent years, I've studied the life and times of Sir Ernest Sato, who is often, and with some justification, held up as an exemplar of the closeness of diplomatic links between Britain and Japan, and yet Sato's life and writings give a much more nuanced picture of the conflicting priorities which led our two countries into a closer diplomatic relationship at that time. We were very different countries for much of the first half of the 20th century as the alliance came to its end in the early 1920s, and we moved during the period of the Great Depression across the world into a period of tragic confrontation between Britain and Japan. And we were very different countries, I think, even when I began my own diplomatic links with Japan as a young student of Japanese in the British Embassy in the 1970s, as we began to recognise that we could learn and should learn from the way in which Japan had rebuilt itself after unimaginable devastation at the end of the Second World War, the Pacific War, and that Japan was a country from which we could learn. We could learn about technology, we could learn about industrial management, we could learn about social cohesion, we could learn about economic policy, we could learn many different ways that would help us begin to tackle the problems of that period more confidently, and more confidently in an economic and increasingly political partnership between our two countries. Now, I had the great privilege as ambassador and as a diplomat who spent 13 years of his life living in Japan and a lot of my time in London in the Foreign Office dealing with Japan. We had the great privilege of being part of building a new relationship in all the areas which you're going to hear more about later in the speakers who are going to come after me. And in doing that, we were able to link ourselves back to other eras where some of these themes applied and some of them resonated. But I hope, while we pay tribute through the first half of this conference to the extraordinary and impressive adventurism of the 17th century, and the greater knowledge that we all have now of the links which were established at that time, I hope that as we reflect on the ways in which the relationship continues to go from strength to strength after 4-5 decades of closer political and diplomatic contact, that the agenda we will set for ourselves will be one that is relevant to a world which is very, very different from the historical eras we refer to, and which is changing, and often changing in sinister and frightening ways, faster than we can imagine. I reflect as an ordinary citizen now. I'm not a diplomat any longer, I'm not an official, I don't work for the British government, I can say what I like. I often reflect that I'm living through an extraordinarily dangerous and difficult time, and that there are not many things which give me confidence when I look at the rise of nationalism across the world and the conflicts which we see on our television screens every evening. I don't have an enormous amount of confidence that we have the leadership we need to navigate us through these frightening situations. But to pay tribute to the British and Japanese governments over the past few decades, and since the decision to leave the European Union, which the Japanese government of Japan was so horrified by in 2016, a great deal of effort has been invested in maintaining the strength of trade and investment and broader political and social links between Britain and Japan. And that is a great and important point of foreign policy, and one which we should celebrate, and one which I think the speakers who come after me are going to talk to you about in more detail. So this is a great platform on which to reflect on what we have yet to come and the strength of the relationship that will help us through the periods that we are about to face. Leslie, thank you very much indeed. And Leslie, I finished on the 10-minute button. So you can keep to time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing our friends talk.